Hey guys, tonight we step into the dark corridors of history, where Henry VIII, the most powerful king of the Tudor era, struggled with horrifying illnesses that not everyone knows. From gout torturing his toes to a leg ulcer that never healed. From his royal halitosis to syphilis, an unwelcome gift of love. Each symptom left a painful and disgusting mark. You would not survive if you had to endure the gruesome treatments. Doctors applying mercury, or mixing horse dung into steam baths. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is in your local area. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. After we have dimmed the lights, turned on the gentle breeze from the ceiling fan, and prepared for our journey of discovery, let us begin the first part of the story about the horrifying diseases of King Henry VIII that not everyone knows. Illness number 1, gout. Gout, also known as the king of maladies, was the signature ailment of the early modern elite. When a diet rich in protein and fine wine was an everyday affair, in his position as the most exalted monarch in Europe, King Henry VIII spared no expense on lavish feasts, Wagyu beef, venison, fresh seafood, and countless varieties of premium wine. Within just a few years, he had accumulated urate levels in his blood, beyond what his body could tolerate, causing the joints of his toes, those first to bear weight, to swell, burn, and ache with unbearable intensity. Court observers described Henry hobbling painfully across grand halls, his face pale from agony, letting out heavy sighs at times. The splendid balls of yesterday became distant memories, replaced by the sight of the king seated in stillness, the folds of his robe cleverly concealing his tormented legs. Royal physicians were forced to design custom footwear lined with fur padding and trembled as they handed him a cane to ease his steps. Yet their efforts were as futile as salt in the sea each time a gout attack recurred. The shoemaker who crafted the king's special boots was mocked, a monarch dancing in medical shoes instead of on the ballroom floor. This jibe was more than mere satire. It underscored the brutality of his indulgent lifestyle. With every gout flare-up, Henry VIII endured excruciating pain within gilded walls and lavish decorations, inspiring both fear and pity among his courtiers. One chronicle even records that during a council meeting, the king's moans echoed so loudly that the session was suspended so he could receive care. From a medical standpoint, Tudor-era gout had no targeted cure. Physicians prescribed strict regimens, cut out red meat, cease all strong drink anathema to a king addicted to revelry. They experimented with herbs like perilla leaves, mugwort powder, and traditional Chinese medicines imported at great expense. Some practitioners even suggested garlic soaked in vinegar to draw out the toxin. But the only result was a more pungent stench that drove court ladies away as if facing an enemy. Royal surgeons went further still, testing Achilles tendon resections to reduce joint pressure. But the poorly mended wounds in this primitive medical environment brought on additional infections. In the end, Henry VIII accepted gout as an intrinsic shade of his life, opulent yet agonizing. From the vantage point of history, gout was not only a symbol of luxurious excess, but also a warning of the consequences of an unbalanced lifestyle. Henry VIII, who wed 6 times in his quest for a male heir, now sought to chase youth through every feast, paying for his pursuits with relentless pain. Gout became proof of power's dual nature. The more one wields, the more the body must endure. Finally, imagine King Henry VIII, a titan of history, seated quietly in his gilded chamber, his legs swollen and bandaged, clutching a dragon-headed cane, occasionally bending to inhale from a potion bottle of garlic and vinegar. This vivid portrait of the gouty king of the Tudor era, both magnificent and tragic, sets the stage for our exploration of the 6 more gruesome illnesses that follow. Following the physical torment of gout, we now step into an even darker realm, where Henry VIII was tormented not only by pain, but also by despair and fear, because his own earthly desires had betrayed him. Illness number 2. Syphilis. Syphilis, a truly unwanted gift, was the consequence of countless one-night affairs with dancers, noble women, and even princesses whom Henry VIII encountered. It may sound glamorous, but it was this very libertinism that plunged the king into a spiral of shame and anxiety. At first, the symptoms were only small sores, but in his mind, they felt like a brutal warning. The greatest body in Europe can be destroyed by its own flesh. This calamity quickly became a scandal throughout the Tudor court. The cold stone walls echoed with rumours. It was whispered that the Queen confided in her ladies-in-waiting about the strange odour each time the king returned to the palace. Once so proud of his strength and authority, Henry now had to hide behind crimson curtains, warily withdrawing whenever anyone dared to touch his hand. Deep inside, he was tormented not only by illness, but by the knowledge that his reputation was crumbling. Will the Tudor throne still stand triumphant after this affair scandal? Unease crept into every thought. Henry often woke in the dead of night, roused by an itching, burning sensation under his skin, his heart pounding like war drums. He would wonder, I was born to rule, yet this body is betraying me. His hesitation and self-doubt made him recoil from intimacy with the Queen and his consorts. As if afraid to spread further disgrace, he became timid and guarded. The very curtains of the royal bedchamber, once a sanctuary of pleasure, became a barrier between desire and dread. In an effort to reassure him, court physicians and herbalists brought forth medieval remedies, smearing mercury onto the sores, inhaling smoke from toxic herbs, and occasionally burning rare resins, such as frankincense, so that the fumes would pass through his respiratory passages. Yet countless times, when Jorge, his personal physician, appeared with a cold mercury flask and thick pipes of herbal smoke, courtiers would murmur, will this mighty king secure his legacy, or be destroyed by this love, sickness? That question pierced Henry's pride like a poisoned arrow. Each failed treatment only deepened his distress. Mercury worked slowly. The ulcers would briefly cease oozing, only to flare up again with cruel intensity. He sat alone in his gilded chamber, sipping each bitter draught, feeling the metallic taste invade his body. Henry feared not only the disease but the guilt. He had used his power to satisfy carnal desires, pursuing beauty and the thrill of conquest day and night, only to bring misery upon his own flesh. Mental and physical crises intertwined, and Henry became increasingly unapproachable. The golden hours, once devoted to governance, shrank, giving way to fevers and lengthy treatment sessions. His psyche swung tragically between self-loathing and fury, ashamed of his weakening body, enraged at his inability to master his own passions. On sleepless nights, he would mutter, I am king, yet I cannot save myself from my own affliction. Under the twin pressures of public scandal and his own suffering, Henry VIII was forced to change his habits. He limited revelries and scaled back courtly gatherings, but each time he refused fresh wine and red meat, he felt a little of his authority slip away. It was a contradictory sensation. I long to be well to rule, yet I lose the pleasures of a monarch. Between power and pleasure, Henry chose to coexist with his illness as a constant, smouldering ache that could not be soothed. By flickering candlelight, one could still glimpse the silhouette of the king undaunted before his enemies, yet trembling at the sound of Jorge's footsteps outside his chamber door. It was his most hollow moment, alone with his love, sickness, where authority could not heal, and wealth could not conceal suffering. Henry VIII, the mighty king, was now a finite man forced to pay for his own earthly appetites. Let us remember that image, a symbol of power brought low by an unwanted gift, before we continue to explore the next horrifying mysteries. following the unrelenting agony of his foul breath. We now enter another terror, the ailment that rendered King Henry VIII unable to stand. As a foot rot became his haunting companion. Illness number 3. Foot rot and an undying leg wound. Immediately after months of battling excruciating gout and the ravages of syphilis, Henry VIII faced a new horror: chronic foot rot. An overabundance of protein in his diet, combined with a sedentary lifestyle and heavy clothing, created the perfect breeding ground for bacteria to flourish. Each morning, he steeled himself for a day of deathly smelling feet, worrying that even his most loyal guards might turn away when supporting him into the Great Hall. This sense of helplessness before his own body plunged Henry into overwhelming shame. In his mind, the throne was no longer a symbol of power, but a dagger piercing his pride. But that was only the beginning. During a tournament meant to showcase his horsemanship, an ability once celebrated in 100 chronicles, Henry fell heavily onto his saddle, leaving a small scratch on his calf. At first, it seemed trivial, but due to inadequate care and his own pride refusing him rest, the wound quickly became infected and flared up repeatedly. Blood and discharge oozed daily, causing his calf to swell, stiffen, and ache with intolerable pain. Courtiers whispered that the wound was deadlier than a snakebite, and a mere draught through a doorway would elicit a pitiful cry from the king. Royal surgeons, hands trembling, were forced to pare away necrotic flesh with razor blades and bandage the wound around the clock. Each time his bed was moved or dressings changed, Henry's moans struck terror into his courtiers, transforming Tudor majesty into a symphony of lament. Minor surgeries carried out in Kennington Palace often lasted until past midnight, candlelight flickering on anxious faces, the scrape of needles stitching flesh, the slash of knives cutting deeper, and the acrid stench of antiseptic smoke combined into a relentless soundtrack of suffering. It was not only the court that was shaken. Henry himself was haunted by the betrayal of his body. He recalled the exhilaration of galloping across fields, boots striking the stirrups as he soared atop his mount, only to become helpless in an instant. Deep inside, he chastised himself. I am the embodiment of dominion, yet now each step burdens me. The disappointment in his own flesh drove him to seclude himself in his private chambers, crying out in delirium, "My authority collapses under this wound." The once vibrant palace fell eerily silent. Swords and lances lay idle at the tournament grounds. The cheers of the populace were silenced when entertainment was cancelled because the king could not stand. Guards who once brandished whips from horseback now sat beside his bedside, sharing each agonized sigh. His regal status was weighed on the scales of pain, where power and flesh clashed without mercy. Henry's psyche spiraled into crisis. He had once boasted of glorious conquests. Now he only yearned for a day he could walk unaided. In sleepless nights, he stared at the blood and pus-soaked bandages, wondering, does this body even deserve a crown? Guilt over trading his health for fame pierced him like a dagger, yet Henry refused to surrender. He ordered the procurement of every herbal remedy and folk cure, poultices of mugwort, ointments of imperial balm, and even hot spring baths to stimulate circulation. But each fleeting relief was followed by a violent resurgence of the ulcer, as though the wound itself whispered, "I will not let you go." Torn between his desire to heal and the brutal reality, Henry sank further into solitude. Feeling his power crumble beneath physical torment, Henry altered the governance of his realm. He limited his audiences, dealt only with the most urgent affairs, and delegated daily rule to his ministers. Internally, he grappled with duty to the crown and longing for rest from his wretched flesh. Each postponed royal command sounded like a sigh from the throne itself, majestic in visage, frail in flesh. Remember this image: a king who once thundered across Europe, now hobbling from a mortal wound to his calf, a monument to power, yet a tortured victim of his own body. From here, Our exploration of the remaining horrifying afflictions will uncover even darker recesses of Henry VIII's mind, one of England's most infamous monarchs. Forever remembered for both tragedy and grandeur. Illness number 4, obesity. From his youth, Henry VIII hid no ambition to manifest his power through feasting. The banquets at Hampton Court became showcases of wealth, tables groaning under venison, foie gras, rare aged cheeses, puddings as lofty as clouds, and deeply aromatic red wines. Yet behind this splendor lay a completely uncontrolled diet and a sedentary lifestyle to alarming extremes. Gradually, the once proud frame grew heavy beneath thick layers of fat, transforming Henry VIII into the very emblem of the gluttonous king. Each time he entered the great hall, he resembled a waning moon slowly sinking into the night sky, his belly swollen, his armor padded with extra leather to hide the cracks. Deep down, Henry had once taken pride in his robust physique, but he increasingly felt the inner turmoil. I once stood firm as a fortress, yet now every step is a trial. By candlelight, his legs would tremble as attendants supported him, producing a scene both heroic and tragic. Historians record that ladies-in-waiting carried platters of food for him day and night, while footmen rushed about to meet his endless demands. They looked upon him with a mixture of reverence and ridicule, for it was his own excess that had imprisoned him in a coat of lard. His thirst for power had morphed into a craving for morsels, and longing for the throne could never override the pangs of perpetual hunger. Every bite of pudding, every sip of wine whispered, "Eat on, glory awaits." Yet immediately following each indulgence came a creeping shame. I am destroying my own body. Must the throne pay the price for my flesh? The conflict within Henry's soul grew ever fiercer. He was fully aware that his authority made the nations of Europe tremble. Yet now he looked as if he were a prisoner in his own kingdom, lacking the strength to mount a horse or to exercise. Henry had to soldier on under a guise of grandeur. During grand duck hunts, he would sit astride the saddle, while his guards ran alongside on foot. The hooves of the supporting cavalry clattered steadily, while he trudged behind, his former prowess fading. In private turmoil, the king pondered, "I wield boundless power, yet my body weakens what remains for me to demonstrate." His insecurity stemmed not only from his appearance but from his attitude. Once a battlefield leader, he now hesitated even to perform the simplest movements. The Tudor palace, once the center of solemn ceremony, had become a stage for each appearance of Henry. A stern face, distant eyes, but a body seemingly bound by the fear of being seen flawed. Every evening, Henry sat alone in his gilded bedchamber, watching the undulating waves of flesh by firelight. He would ask himself, "How can I avoid being defeated by my own body?" The iron will that had once conquered lands now drove him to seek an escape from his tortured form. A constant reminder echoed in his mind, "I cannot allow this image to become material for posterity's mockery." End quote. Loneliness weighed ever heavier. Henry recalled every contemporary medical admonition: diet, exercise, cold baths. But how could a king cancel a sumptuous feast and head to the gym? He considered organizing wrestling matches or staging chariot races, but advanced only with the utmost caution for fear of compromising his dignity. Each tentative decision reflected the counsel of William Somerset, his trusted minister, who had repeatedly urged that the revels be cut back, only to have Henry agree for a single day. By the hearth, Henry often sat before a mirror, trying on different garments to conceal the bulge of his midriff. He mused, "My renown rests on power, not on appearance, yet appearance will make them forget my authority." This contradiction grew ever deeper, causing Henry to take greater care in his ceremonial dress, adding length to his tunics, covering more skin. His mood became withdrawn, his eyes occasionally reflecting a wistful longing for leaner days. Yet it is precisely this tragic grandeur that defines Henry VIII. None can forget the image of the giant king trudging through the courtyard, crown atop his head. Massive frame, moving ponderously. His presence proved one undeniable truth. Power does not exempt one from suffering the flesh. Opulence cannot cloak the wounds of the heart. His colossal form became both sentence and indelible mark upon history's pages. Remember this moment, the majestic, ambitious king, now confronted by his own mortal frailty. From here, our journey into the next horrifying afflictions will reveal even darker recesses of the mind of one of England's most infamous monarchs. Following the image of the mighty king wrestling with his own body, we now step into an even more harrowing aspect, the fetid stench that permeated each breath, a hidden shame that no throne could conceal. Illness number 5, halitosis, the king's overpowering breath. No one would have imagined that amid glory and power, Henry VIII carried a secret that made anyone who came near him hesitate: chronic halitosis, a diet rich in red meat and fine wine, coupled with a disregard for oral hygiene, provided the perfect environment for bacteria to flourish, assaulting all who approached with every exhalation. Whenever the king spoke at court banquets, his words mingled with the scents of incense, smoke, and raw flesh in a suffocating haze. Courtiers and foreign envoys would exchange furtive glances and step aside when greeting him, as though they feared inhaling the Tudor poison. Henry's psyche shifted unpredictably each time he entered the Great Hall. Once celebrated in chronicles for a breath as powerful as a sea breeze, the king now faced the tormenting reality. Can my words still persuade when this stench suffocates? The distant gazes of his courtiers and the soft sighs swirling around the tea tables pressed on his heart like a leaden weight. In that era, there were no lozenges or modern breath sprays, only folk remedies such as chewing mint leaves, burning frankincense, or rinsing with strong spirits. Henry would attempt to chew a fresh mint leaf before addressing the court, but the fleeting freshness soon vanished, replaced by acrid odours. When he placed a courteous kiss upon the crown or on the Queen's hand, many ladies in waiting feigned warm enthusiasm, pretending not to notice the foulness, simply to spare their sovereign's dignity. This profound irony unsettled Henry deeply. In his private moments, he would ask himself, if power can be as heavy as a throne, is my own breath even heavier than the responsibility of ruling an empire? Each night, after the court festivities ended, he retreated to his private chamber, sat before an ivory dressing table mirror, and punished himself by holding a sip of strong spirit in his mouth to mask the odour. Yet at dawn, the stench returned as ruthless as ever, reminding him, I remain human and still bear this stain. End of. In his confusion, Henry sought out royal physicians and court herbalists in hopes of a definitive cure. They presented him with flasks of cold mercury, pipes for inhaling toxic herbal smoke, and rare Chinese herbal concoctions. Each time his personal physician, Dr. Jorge, appeared with treatment implements in hand, the courtiers would whisper, how long will this mighty king endure his deadly breath? That question pierced Henry's pride like an arrow, leaving him to ponder. I once conquered the hearts of noble women who now dares to trust my words, yet many treatments proved only temporary. Mercury ointments would briefly cause the sores in his mouth to contract, but the toxic metal only added to the dryness and cracking of his gums. Frankincense smoke would mask some of the odour, but anyone inhaling it, even the Queen, would cough violently. According to some accounts, after a single steam inhalation of the potent herbal blend, Henry lost his voice for 3 days, causing alarm among his courtiers. Has the Tudor throne never heard his sovereign's oath? Henry's mental state grew fragile. On one occasion, he is said to have locked himself in his study and muttered, I once spoke with thunderous conviction. Now I flee from my own breath. This despair haunted him through fitful nights, leaving dark circles beneath his eyes and an emaciated gait. The burden of honour and authority weighed on every thought, deepening the pangs of his wounded dignity. In the end, Henry VIII was forced to accept royal breath as an indelible guilt he could not wash away. He learned to conceal the foul odour with costly silk scarves, adjusted the distance at which he addressed the court, and only allowed the most trusted attendants near his person. Yet this very blend of majesty and melancholy only intensified the epic grandeur of the Tudor monarch's portrait. A sovereign both commanding and vulnerable, a breath so potent it could rule a court, yet so repellent it formed an invisible barrier between him and the world. Remember this image, the august king, burdened by his overpowering breath and unrelenting shame before we continue to explore the remaining horrifying afflictions. Following the physical and mental torment of his leg wound, we now enter another dark realm, the affliction hidden behind sweet goblets, where Henry VIII drowned himself to forget loneliness and the burden of the crown. Illness number 6. Alcohol addiction, the royal hangover of a king. Horseback riding was no match for drunkenness. Henry VIII not only used wine as an indispensable component of every court feast, but also as an entertainment elixir to dispel stress after palace intrigues, power struggles, or political failures. At first, he laughed heartily over rich goblets, proudly toasting his companions. But that inebriation gradually became a double-edged sword. The more he drank, the longer the stupor lasted, and the more savage the aftermath. Whenever the royal hangover struck, Henry awoke with a hammering headache, bloodshot eyes, a bitter tongue, utter exhaustion, and a disordered mind. Instead of lucidly managing state affairs, he struggled through nausea, fretting over unread letters, unsigned decrees, and delayed policies. Secretaries and councillors began to worry. Did the most powerful king in Europe still have the clarity to enact laws or negotiate treaties? They discreetly prepared ledger books, waiting for him to sober enough to coerce his signature. But not a few times Henry laid aside his robe and extinguished the lamps, leaving the fate of the realm in a drunken haze. Within his family, Henry's addiction created a painful rift with his queen and children. Anne Boleyn, once indulging her husband with intimate private banquets, now recoiled at his tipsy ramblings. The family dinner table, where princes sought affection and counsel, became a scene of ever-replenishing goblets, causing the young royal scions to shrink back in fear. Court legend holds that on one occasion Prince Edward hesitated to hand his father a mock crown, is wary of that closest moment, which prompted Henry's ire and a harsh rebuke, deepening the children's dread. At court, the king's cup became a moment of reckoning for his ministers. In a drunken state, he could lose self-control and issue contradictory decrees, one day ordering punishment for disloyalty, the next rescinding the death sentence on the spot. This unpredictability sown panic, deterring officials from proactively suggesting reforms or offering counsel. They feared a sudden royal uprising, a dread compounded by rumours that Henry once asked his servants to collect empty wine bottles for a sorcerer to divine the dynasty's fate. Amid the stupor, Henry would solemnly vow, "From now on I shall abstain," marking his words with a grand oath before the council. Yet at dawn, the hangover's memory faded, and the promise was forgotten like a drunken dream. This cycle filled him with self-reproach. I, born to rule, I am bound by these fetters of drink. In his depths, he understood that wine had stolen the clarity and prestige he had laboured so hard to build. Guilt weighed on every decision. He recalled the image of himself clad in gleaming armour, striding from the great hall with confident steps as the embodiment of authority. Now he leaned on a cane, clutching a flask to mask the scent of alcohol, wondering, who truly owns this throne? Is it me or this poison in a bottle? Many nights he submerged himself in a cold bath, hearing each drop of wine echoing in his memory, lamenting how he had let the love of drink rule him. Yet Henry was not easily dissuaded from his pleasure. Each time he refused a goblet, He felt deprived of something precious, as if losing the absolute power to stir the hearts of others. He ordered searches for new vintages, wines imported from Bordeaux and Champagne, hoping for a novel intoxication to fill his solitude. Gradually, the court became a stage for grand bacchanals, where the king, his cup brimming, would prattle on, his former majesty lost in drunken ramble. Increasingly, Henry realized he was a slave to his own libations. No wine. No counsel. No wine. Not decrees. Courtiers were cautious, unwilling to invite him to feasts until he was sober, yet soon feared that a silent banquet would offend the populace. They fretted. He is neglecting the nation's ambitions for strong drink. Ultimately, Henry VIII's alcoholism was more than a battle with spirits. It was a psychological civil war between the thirst for power and the thirst for drink, between duty to the crown and the heart-rending passion for wine. This was the deep fissure in the soul of a king, where alcohol did not merely slake thirst but stained the court, his family, and Tudor history with sorrow. So, we have explored the 6 most horrifying illnesses of King Henry VIII. From the torment of gout to his alcohol addiction, the royal hangover that shook the entire court. Next, let us examine how Henry, the Queen, and his children strove to treat these afflictions, as well as the court's reaction to these peculiar and costly remedies. Henry VIII was not one to suffer in silence. As soon as his first gout flare emerged, the Queen and her ladies-in-waiting pressed the royal physicians to find every means of pain relief. From strict dietary measures, cutting out red meat and ceasing all wine, to applying perilla leaves and mugwort poultices to the swollen joints. Although ginger steeped in honey offered slight relief, the gout recurred so severely that the physicians proposed iced compresses, then moved on to suctioning joint fluid with sulphur glass tubes. Common rumour held that it was the Queen herself who brought into the treatment chamber herbal concoctions from French monks. But in the end, these provided only temporary easing of the pain, only for gout to strike back at the moment the court needed focus most. When syphilis manifested, the urgency only intensified. Western doctors recommended applying mercury ointment to the sores, believing the heavy metal would draw out the poison. Yet frequent exposure to this toxic substance turned Henry's lips a bruised purple, caused his gums to bleed, and sometimes led to neurological poisoning. A handful of progressive physicians even suggested extracting all of his teeth to eliminate bacterial hideouts, but the king agreed only to remove a few problematic teeth, stabilizing the wound only for it to return swiftly. Each failed experiment was smoothed over by court physicians praising his royal dignity, concealing bitter whispers about the limitations of contemporary medicine. Obesity likewise would not be left alone by the Queen and physicians. They urged Henry to wear tighter garments, join extended hunting expeditions, and swim in the cold palace lake to shed pounds. Anne Boleyn organised swimming contests at the royal pond, hoping the king would find relief and sweat it out. Yet Henry participated half-heartedly and soon abandoned the effort. Exhausted, the court at this time pinned hopes on physical activity, restoring his former vigour, but all it did was deepen his self-consciousness, while the excess flesh clung stubbornly, folding behind his armour. For halitosis, physicians and royal herbalists competed to concoct every form of deodorizing remedy, from finely ground bird droppings mixed with wine to mercury salves applied to the gums. Mercury was thought to pull the toxins, but it left Henry's mouth bruised black, his gums bleeding, and the odour even more savage. Some doctors persisted in recommending full dental extraction, but Henry consented only to the removal of a few teeth, to reduce bacterial hiding places. Each unsuccessful trial was papered over by lavish praise of his majestic composure, hiding their frustration and avoiding speculation about the shortcomings of their art. Foot rot and that undying leg wound were also treated by any method imaginable. Royal surgeons used razors to pare away necrotic flesh, then dressed the wound with antiseptic herbal alcohol, At times they prescribed soaking the foot in hot mineral springs to stimulate circulation, yet each fresh dressing seemed to spawn another sore. And the pus would flow anew. Courtiers whispered that if they continued this patchwork approach, Henry would never heal, and the wound would spread, threatening his life. Regarding his alcoholism, advisors strove to persuade the king to cut back. The Queen presented hydrotherapy, using herbal waters in place of wine, but Henry quickly grew bored. Royal banquets were supplemented with mint tea and fruit juices to limit the drunkenness. Yet the king would sip once and send a lady-in-waiting scurrying for his favoured vintage. Courtiers secretly proposed formal wine curfews, banning alcohol at council sessions and important ceremonies, but dared not enact them for fear of offending the king. The court's reactions varied widely. Some sneered that even the king's arrows lacked the bite of his wine. A jab at his tippling. Others fretted. How can we preserve royal ceremony before foreign emissaries? Treaties and diplomatic accords could be derailed by a single bout of inebriation. Many envoys postponed audiences upon hearing of Henry's latest drunken spree, tarnishing Tudor prestige as the fickle throne. Not only at home, but monarchs across Europe exchanged remedies. They dispatched physicians to advise and collect recipe secrets. Yet every treatment proved only temporary. Halitosis persisted. The leg wound kept oozing. Gout. Syphilis. Excess fat. And the wine festered in a vicious cycle. In the end, Henry VIII accepted living with these ailments as an integral aspect of royal life. His breath, his gait, his cups of wine, and his pains forever entwined with the Tudor throne, becoming a horrific legacy that cannot be erased. After enduring 6 horrifying and perilous maladies, agonizing gout, relentless syphilis, intimidating obesity, dreadful halitosis, excruciating foot rot, and the ravages of alcohol, Henry VIII's soul was like an ancient vessel cracked beyond repair. Now, we delve into the turbulent inner world of a king whose body and spirit were both slipping away. From the moment he awoke each morning, Henry was no longer the imposing monarch stepping out of his royal bedchamber, but a figure tormented by drink and disease. Every time he opened his eyes, he confronted not an image of power, but a battered body and encroaching fears. Helplessness in the face of illness sent him into chaos. He questioned whether he was still worthy of the crown when his authority could only be exerted through decisions handed down by ministers because his own mind lacked clarity. Self-doubt seeped into every thought. Henry VIII, once the epitome of regal splendour, now avoided mirrors for fear of seeing his own haggard reflection. He spent sleepless nights tossing and turning with joint pains, itching sores, hungover nausea, and persistent coughs from the foot rot. His mind blurred reality and nightmare. At times, he would absent-mindedly pour water into his wine glass and wonder, have I forgotten or ever emptied the cup I raised but yesterday? The sounds of court, the rattling of his cane, the gong announcing council, the murmurs of attendants became reminders of responsibilities falling apart. Henry felt as though thousands of needles pierced his heart, some causing dull aches, others sharp pangs, as if the entire realm conspired against him. His isolation deepened when the Queen and his children grew distant, leaving him alone with delirium. In drunken moments, he believed only strong spirits could silence the small voice within. The throne is slipping from my grasp. I am messing. Gradually, Henry's mind unravelled. On rare calm days, he became haunted by visions of exile, dynastic collapse, and even dreams of pillows soaked in ulcerated flesh. Guilt over past sins, failed marriages, harsh decrees returned to torment him in the dead of night. He who once ordered beheadings now commanded himself to remain silent before the mirror. He who once bestowed honours now bestowed them upon his wounds, his gout, and his syphilis. This mental collapse made Henry irritable and unpredictable. Less than an hour after pledging his resolve to the council, He might shift tone and berate a secretary for a trivial error. Courtiers dubbed these episodes storms in the king's heart, moments when he demanded explanations for why a medicine had not taken effect, only to regret cruelly undermining his own trust. Henry's psyche oscillated between arrogance and self-denial. He forced himself to practice riding to prove he could still match his European allies. Yet the sight of his horse's gallop alongside his limping foot was heartbreaking. He would muse, "I am the lighthouse guiding the kingdom, but now I am a broken lamppost in a storm." His irrational ruminations drove him to constantly review the list of his ailments, as if defeating one might banish them all. Yet each reading plunged him deeper into despair. Many nights, Henry sat by a trembling candle, staring at the bandages on his leg, then tracing the pills arrayed on his table, thinking, "Am I a failure? What will posterity say of my reign?" Exposed fear and the pain of renouncing his royal identity made him withdraw further. He accepted information only when forced to sign decrees. Each signature now weighted with humiliation. Even rare moments of peace offered no consolation. In his private gardens, he once delighted in birdsong and blooming flowers. Now he stood in silence, watching petals wither as if they mirrored his own life. He wondered if he could drain this well of sorrow before leaving a permanent scar upon history's soul. In this condition, Henry turned to spiritual comforts. Music, poetry, and even religious contemplation. He hoped to find serenity. But each piano chord reverberated with tragic echoes of his fragility. He wept silently at mournful melodies, feeling that no one could truly understand him. In sum, the 6 diseases did more than erode Henry VIII's body. They gouged a deep wound in his soul. From a valiant king, he became a man haunted by fear. Torn between the instinct to survive and the longing for immortality, medical treatments might temporarily assuage his physical pains, but healing his spirit lay beyond the reach of even the most ironclad throne. This was his silent tragedy, a great historical figure crushed from within. Leaving a lesson on the limits of mortality and the cost of power, these afflictions from the torment of gout, the relentless grip of syphilis, the crushing weight of obesity, the dreadful scourge of halitosis, the excruciating rot of his feet, to the destructive haze of his royal hangovers, emerged as relentless foes, daily eroding both the body and the soul of the Tudor king. They spurned his power and privilege, clinging mercilessly to Henry VIII until his final breath. Born with a destiny of grandeur, Henry VIII found that, as his years stretched on, his maladies only multiplied, and no miracle could fully vanquish them. Among the 6 horrifying conditions we have explored, gout's cruel assault, syphilis' stealthy destruction, obesity's suffocating embrace, halitosis' shocking offense, foot rot's relentless decay, and the ravages of alcoholism, only a handful of symptoms ever found brief relief. While the majority doggedly pursued him to his tomb, gout, once somewhat alleviated by strict dietary regimens and ice compresses, still struck him at the most inopportune moments. During council sessions, hunting expeditions, and even high-stakes, diplomatic negotiations. At times, he could not place a foot ahead of the other without wincing, leaning upon his cane in the palace corridors, proof that gout, though lulled at times, would not release its grip on a king prone to gastronomic excess. Syphilis, the unwelcome gift, was managed in part by medieval therapies, mercury salves, herbal fumigations, and selective tooth extractions to reduce bacterial hideouts. Mercury would briefly contract the ulcers, but not without silencing his voice for days at a time, while tooth removal only curtailed, not cured, the infection. As a result, syphilis continued its quiet ravage, sometimes invading his mind and plunging him into mysterious deliriums. Obesity was combated with extended hunts, frequent baths in the palace lake, and tight-fitting garments, even determined horseback practice. Yet his noble lifestyle and lavish banquets twice deceived him. He would shed a few pounds, only to be drawn back into opulence by the very feasts that defined his reign. The excess flesh collected in folds beneath his armor, a reminder that no authority could conquer the immutable laws of biology. Halitosis, the dreadful breath, was once masked for hours by concoctions of ground bird droppings mixed with wine, peppermint leaves, and mercury ointments on the gums. Yet its rancid stench returned as a declaration of war. Nothing can hide this royal breath. Even when he maintained a safe distance from foreign emissaries and court ladies, the foul odour clung to his royal utterances. Foot rot and the undying leg wound were treated by minor surgery to remove necrotic flesh. Constant dressings soaked in alcohol infused with herbs, hot spring soaks to stimulate circulation, and herbal steam baths. There were days when the wound dried, only to weep fresh pus, prompting whispers that this injury spares no noble soul. Henry blamed himself when recalling the fateful moment he was thrown from his saddle. For from that instant forward, the once powerful footing of the king became a horrifying burden. Alcoholism, the royal hangover, proved equally intractable. Though he once vowed to abstain and tried mint tea and fruit juices in place of wine, the temptation remained irresistible. The royal hangover struck like a nightmare, throbbing headaches, nausea, and chaotic thoughts. Each morning he sobered to face a backlog of unsettled affairs, wishing the crown needed no spirits to sustain its majesty. For the remainder of his life, Henry VIII accepted these diseases as an unpayable debt. He employed every remedy from east to west, summoned renowned Italian physicians, embraced hydrotherapy, and even prayed fervently at chapel altars. Yet he could only stall the pain, never eradicate it. As his breath weakened and his steps faltered, Henry realized that the throne was not divine human health. Even for a mighty king, remained fragile. In the end, Henry VIII passed on, still burdened by these 6 maladies, foes that had marked his body and soul, and only in death did gout relent. Syphilis loosen its hold. Excess flesh no longer weigh upon him. Foul breath vanish. The leg wound close, and the royal hangovers fade to silence. His legacy would be shaped not only by marriages and power struggles, but by the stark tragedy of human frailty. Absolute power does not exempt one from physical and mental suffering. This harsh truth endures. While history applauds Henry VIII as a transformer of his dynasty's fate, it is these horrific maladies that forged the undying tragedy of the king who could not conquer himself. When the throne becomes shackles upon the flesh, imagine Henry VIII, once the mighty Tudor monarch, awakening each morning not to command an empire, but to confront 6 relentless diseases that had corroded his flesh and carved deep scars in his soul. He rose upon his gilded bed, leaning on a slender iron cane, eyes half closed from the agony in his toes where gout flared anew. After every night's rest, lips cracked and raw from unyielding sores, and a rancid stench clung to each breath, twisting his heart with fresh torment. Henry placed his foot upon the intricate Persian rug with unsteady steps, requiring 2 attendants to support him. He lifted his head toward the misty window, where dawn's light fell upon the rose garden, a scene brimming with life yet powerless to soothe his shattered spirit. His once stately frame, now wrapped in cumbersome robes and bandages soaked with antiseptic, braced against the pain in his calf as he forced himself forward, determined to hide his groans from the courtiers awaiting him in the great hall. Entering the council chamber, Henry acknowledged to himself that the throne had become his prison, no longer a symbol of authority but the portrait of a man punished by fate. Each gout tablet swallowed, every injection administered to quell his sores, and every razor used to pare away dead flesh stood as testament to his body's failure. A chronic cough, born of his festering wound, caught in his throat. Each movement of his face, a fresh reminder that even a king must endure hidden suffering. When Henry sat upon the throne, he struggled to speak, his voice rough and constricted by the phlegm decorating his throat. Ministers murmured among themselves, eyes shining with both pity and concern. Every decree, drafted or rescinded, was delayed by the after-effects of last night's wine. The bitter irony that the very libations he once raised in triumph now shattered his clarity. Each draught of wine had once numbed his bodily pain but unleashed a storm within his mind, blurring the line between physical agony and emotional torment. Throughout the session, Henry clung to his cane, hand trembling as he passed a sealed decree to a foreign ambassador. Even issuing an order became a triumph of will. Gout and that immortal calf wound alternated in their assaults, leaving him longing to remain motionless and let his ministers govern. Yet that was not the nature of a king. Henry insisted on proceeding with the scheduled parade of arms despite his body's collapse. As the banquet for the foreign envoys commenced, Henry faced yet another wave of his royal hangover. The deep crimson wine he lifted once as a badge of nobility had become an enemy. Spinning his head and wringing his gut, he sipped lemon water to mask his breath. But it proved only a temporary reprieve. His courteous smile transformed into a burdensome ruse to conceal the overpowering odour. When night fell, Henry returned to his private chamber. Acutely aware of mortality closing in, each heartbeat grew feebler, each breath dependent on his swollen, painful limbs. He pressed a hand to his chest, where his heart hammered against his ribcage in concert with the persistent cough from his festering wound. In the darkness, he rang a small bell for his physician, begging for a miracle, cure only to receive a cold mercury flask, deepening his dread of the very metal meant to heal him. Amid high fevers and delirium, Henry awoke from a nightmare in which he lay buried beneath writhing corpses. 6 incarnations of his diseases, grinning mercilessly over him. He screamed in despair, yearning to mount his horse again, to banish the wine, to invoke a miracle that might erase his afflictions. Yet no miracle ever came, only the slow tick of days worn away by suffering. In his final moments, Henry knelt before his throne, gazing at the room set as it was on the day of his coronation. He silently reflected on past glories, on the 6 invisible adversaries that had claimed each of his senses, and on the fragile humanity beneath his regal veneer. It stood as the most severe lesson of all. No throne, however splendid, can withstand the ravages of time and disease. When the body fails, the spirit still commands the court. Imagine the palace so oppressive in its silence that each feeble step of Henry VIII echoed off the cold stone floors. His body was all but spent, yet the resonance of his will continued to shake the hearts of those around him. Rumours of the king's declining health spread like a noxious wind through the corridors, leaving courtiers restless and uneasy. At dawn, the queen and her closest advisers gathered in the privy chamber, Anne Boleyn, her eyes weary but resolute, ordered a spare bed to be set up in the great hall in case the king lacked the strength to return to his bedchamber. Princess Elizabeth, her gaze heavy with sorrow, watched her father's suffering and could do nothing but pray by the hour. The ladies in waiting quietly brought in jars of ginger honey syrup, lemon juice, and even bowls of mosquito-repelling herbs, measures as humble as they were inadequate against the 6 diseases that had ravaged Henry's body. When the hour of council arrived, tension gripped the great hall. Thomas Cromwell sat in the front row, fingers clenched around the day's docket. The king's gout flared in waves, forcing him to limp even when entering the chapel. The ulcer on his calf still oozed. His chronic bad breath clung to every word he uttered. His alcoholism delayed sessions because he was not in his right mind. His legs swelled so severely that 2 attendants took turns supporting him, and his immense bulk required that his royal robe be cut twice as wide. When Henry rose to deliver his edicts, he raised a trembling hand so violently that the porcelain inkstand beside him rattled. The cough from his rotting foot echoed through the chamber, making some councillors recoil, undeterred. Henry bellowed that government could not halt for the sake of one man. The court must go on, his voice, booming through the stifling air, bolstered the loyal and terrified the power-hungry. After the council, two factions formed among the regents. One group urgently proposed sending the king to a remote island off Cornwall for rest, hoping fresh sea air would ease his maladies. The other group protested fiercely, "If the king is isolated, will power slip into our hands?" Their concern was not charity but self-interest. When French envoys delayed the state banquet by more than a day upon hearing of Henry's grave illness, Anne Boleyn scrambled to procure herbal wine and soft pastries to avoid upsetting his stomach. In the palace courtyard, the clip-clop of nightly drill gave way to the halting shuffle of Henry's steps. Soldiers who once hailed his martial prowess now stood silent, compassion and pity in their eyes. They wondered if their king would ever again lead the cavalry in a triumphal review. Even the king's secretary, who normally penned each royal proclamation with precision, now drafted petitions to suspend costly ceremonies and redirect funds toward medicines. He hesitated over the draft of Henry's prior delirious will and interim regency plan, then sighed, "A mighty king." And in the end he leaves behind trembling ink. Henry's mind wavered like a vessel in a storm. He panicked to see servants scurrying aside to make way for the litter that carried him to his next examination. At every court banquet he attempted a polite smile, but sounded hoarse and hollow. When night fell and only the flicker of a single lamp remained in his study, Henry stared at the map of his realm and wondered, "How long will I let my illnesses dictate the fate of the kingdom?" His family faced a cruel paradox, expressing loyalty while maneuvering to preserve power. Princess Elizabeth silently placed a cup of medicine by her father's pillow, begging him to take it. Prince Edward, too young to grasp the danger fully, frowned at his father's collapse. Anne Boleyn, steadfast to the end, sought out Christian monks to pray and even organized the Eucharist procession within the palace, hoping divine intervention would shield him. Despite the tension, the court continued in a haze of hope and fear. On some days, Henry presided over trials, but would shout down the defense counsel in agony, then burst into tears at the sight of the condemned's family. These unpredictable displays deepened the court's anxiety. Did they serve a king or a talking corpse? At dusk, when the court's bustle quieted, Henry returned to his private chamber, attended only by a few loyal servants. He sank into an armchair, eyes reddened, staring at the frosty window as he reflected. The throne that once crowned me in glory now imprisons my body. From time to time, he would mark a small tally on the wall, one notch for each night. He had survived the pain, an affirmation that he still existed. However faintly, stay with us to discover whether Henry VIII would find even a spark of hope amid this physical and mental tumult in his final days, and how the Tudor court would carry on in the shadow of an ailing king's legacy. When death knocks, the dark legacy begins. The final night upon Henry VIII's throne fell in a terrifying silence. The candles in the great hall had burned down, leaving only a lone oil lamp flickering in the gilded chamber where the king took his last breath. 6 horrifying ailments: gnawing gout, unending ulcer, an uncontrollable bulk of flesh, dreadful halitosis, relentless foot rot, and the haze of drunkenness had all laid siege to the monarch's body until the very end. When his chamberlain entered, he found Henry leaning against the window railing, staring into the pale night sky as if searching for answers. His hands trembled as he whispered, "Will anyone continue this story?" Moments later, he doubled over from an agonizing spasm in his calf and bent to retrieve his bell to call the physician. When the elderly doctor who had treated him for many years collapsed in tears, Henry looked up, sorrow in his eyes. In that moment, he recognized that his final enemy had utterly overwhelmed him. The great hall's silence shattered at the sound of his final labored breath, then fell into stillness. His iron cane clattered to the floor like a verdict being delivered. The assembled courtiers dropped to their knees. The ladies in waiting wept in choking sobs. And even the hardest hearts could not hold back tears. In that moment, Henry VIII departed from the throne he had once conquered with such fervour. After the chamber door closed, Anne Boleyn, once steadfast and triumphant, collapsed beside her husband's hand. Princess Elizabeth and Prince Edward trembled at her side. Like two ghostly pillars in the quiet night of sorrow, they knew they had lost not only a father, but the very pillar on which their realm had depended. Immediately thereafter, the council convened an emergency session to issue a regency proclamation. Thomas Cromwell, eyes still brimming with tears, steadied his hand to sign the document, allocating authority to the ministers in a swift move to preserve order. Someone had to lead the kingdom, even as the throne sat empty. Meanwhile, the news spread throughout Europe. The French ambassador postponed all his travels, and the Spanish envoy renegotiated treaties in fear of instability. Anne ordered the royal kitchens to cease all festivities, replaced court music with solemn hymns, and arranged a memorial service within the palace. The piano melodies that once rang triumphantly now offered prayers for the late king's soul. On the day of the state funeral, the ceremony was carried out with solemn grandeur, the gilded coffin placed in the courtyard before the palace, 6 armoured guards bearing it in measured steps. Thousands of commoners gathered outside the walls, weeping for the king who could not conquer his own body. Candles flickering along the corridors in the evening breeze evoked hazy memories of a glorious era long past. Henry VIII's legacy became a mournful symphony. Those 6 devastating diseases came to symbolize his passionate yet brutal reign. It is said that the trembling signatures he once penned are now cherished historical relics, bearing witness to the inner tragedy and ruthless nature of power. The Queen survived only a short while longer, passing away in solitude. Their children, Elizabeth, Mary, and Edward, grew up haunted by their father's suffering, each governing the realm with decisions shaped by his ailing legacy. Elizabeth later ruled with moderation, perhaps because she had witnessed her father's pain and sought to avoid repeating his mistakes. Some later historians wondered, had Henry not been tormented by those 6 invisible foes? Would the Tudor dynasty have truly shone so brightly and endured so long? Yet it was precisely those afflictions that forged his legend. A king who lived not only for power, but fought daily against unyielding pain. From his story, they draw this lesson. Even at the pinnacle of authority, one cannot escape the bounds of mortality. Those 6 relentless adversaries: gout, a blood-borne scourge, excess weight, foul breath, unending ulceration, and the poison of drink did more than claim Henry VIII's life. They etched into history a tragic refrain of power, pride, and human limitation, and as they rest now upon his tomb, their final message resounds: no throne, however grand, can conceal the anguish of the body or the tearing of the soul. And so the journey through the tragic life of Henry VIII comes to its final chapter. From the prince eager to conquer on the battlefield to the most powerful monarch in Europe, he faced 6 merciless adversaries: the disease that tormented his joints with relentless gout, an ulcer that would never heal, an uncontrollable bulk of flesh, breath so foul it tormented those around him, unyielding foot rot, and the haze of drunkenness that destroyed his spirit. Each affliction did more than ravage his body, it tore at his very soul, transforming the throne that once represented supreme power into the shackles of a broken man's fate. Recall the image of Henry VIII, the first time he sat upon his throne, eyes alight with ambition and pride, ready to etch his name into history, and then picture him at the end, slumped against his bedroom window, murmuring, "Will anyone continue this story?" amid long bouts of coughing and excruciating leg pain. Time itself reads like a tragic volume, each page stained with the amber of spilled wine and marked by the razor's edge that cut away his diseased flesh. It stands as proof that, however boundless one's authority, humans remain powerless before the cycle of birth, aging, illness, and death. But Henry VIII bequeathed more than a tale of suffering. He left us a harsh reminder that in the race for power, we must not neglect the care of our own bodies and minds. The greater the power, the heavier the responsibility, but without health, all glory becomes meaningless. Draconian policies, marriages of convenience, and lavish feasts turn into question marks before the painful legacy of disease. From Henry's story, we learn the lesson of human limitation. Do not let the thirst for power and pleasure deepen the wounds of body and spirit. And now, as night falls after this long journey, let these lessons settle in your mind. If ever you feel overwhelmed by the pressures of work or the stresses of daily life, remember that mental and physical health are your most precious assets. Do not wait for illness to knock at your door before scrambling for a cure. Some wounds cut so deeply that even the most costly remedies cannot heal them. Finally, I offer you a wish for peace. May you have a truly restful night, letting sleep carry away every worry and renew your energy for tomorrow. If you found this video helpful and wish to continue exploring fascinating, in-depth historical stories with me, please tap the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Every subscription is a great encouragement for me to produce even higher quality content. Once again, sleep well, and I look forward to seeing you in the next videos.